If there's anybody in this room who doesn't know me, my name is Tova. I work in emerging market research, and I've been with the company for over 10 years. And I have been working flexibly for about half of that time, and it's actually only thanks to the flexible working arrangements that I've been able to stay in work. So whilst I'm by no means an expert on policy, although I think I know a little bit now after researching this, I should hopefully know a fair amount about the benefits that it can bring to both company and individual, and that's why I'm here to talk about flexible working arrangements. So I want to talk a little bit about what flexible working arrangements are and how they can look, and go through the positive and negative impacts of them, and also talk a little bit about best practice. So, how are we looking? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 men and quite a lot more women. The men in this room, how many of you work flexibly? 2. The women in this room, how many of you work flexibly? Actually, only 4. How many of you who don't work flexibly would like to? A couple, yeah. I'd love to keep this away from gender stereotypes, but I can't. Because the sad reality is that flexible working is more used by women, particularly women who have children and or caring responsibilities. And it is more likely that women's careers suffer from working flexibly than men's careers. I think that Aquaris is actually a pretty good employer when it comes to offering flexible working to a wide range of people and for a wide range of reasons, and that it's not just working mothers, but it's much wider across the group. But regardless, the societal attitude towards working mums are still a little unequal, shall we say. The first 2 points are from a 2012 survey in which less than 10% of respondents thought that women with children under school age should work full-time. And over half of them also thought that women would prefer to have a male provider. And I don't know about anybody else, but I'm coming out of feminism like hives when I read things like that. In 2016, PwC estimated that the economic value to be gained by women returning to work after a career break is £1.7 billion. So if any of the mums in here are feeling a little undervalued at times, take a moment to have a look at that figure and reconsider. When men work flexibly, they mostly work from home, or they go, or they use flexi time. Women are much more likely to work part-time, and actually women are much more likely to take a part-time job that they are overqualified for in order to manage childcare and work. When men go part-time, they tend not to have dependent children. They go part-time for other reasons, which I think is very interesting. But the reality is that people wish to work flexibly. Whether they have children or not, at a variety of times in their lives, they want to work flexibly. And there are so many benefits for organizations to offer flexible working by a range of options. So, what are flexible working arrangements? According to the UK government, flexible working is a way of working that suits an employee's needs. For example, having flexible start and finish time, or working from home. The Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development are describing it as a type of working arrangement which gives a degree of flexibility on how long, where, when, and at what times employees work, which is actually a slightly wider definition and puts a little bit less onus on it being just the employee rather than the employer benefiting from it as well. Flexible working arrangements include, but are not limited to, things like flexi time, which is when you adjust your start and finish time, part-time work, which I obviously don't need to explain, I hope. Term time working, so you're paid across the year, but you don't work during school holidays. You can work compressed hours, so this is where you work full-time, but you squeeze it in, so you do a 4-day week or a 9-day fortnight. Annual hours, similar to term time working in that you're paid over the years, you have a set number of hours you work, but when you work it is sort of up for grabs. There's obviously working from home or mobile working options. There are family leave programs where a company may offer paid leave for a fixed period of time because of sort of unexpected extra family commitment requirements. There's something called commissioned outcomes, where you're paid for the work you do and not for the number of hours you work. Just over half of UK employees work flexibly. But the majority would like to work flexibly in a way that is currently not available to them. And some of the statistics I found say that about 80% of the UK organisations offer part-time, but less than half offer any other form of flexible working arrangements. 1 in 5 do not have access to any flexible working arrangements at all in their jobs. It is, I was a little bit surprised to read this, more common in the public than the private sector. I was the other weekend I was hanging out with a bunch of mums, and 2 of us worked in the private sectors, and we worked extremely flexibly, and the rest worked in the public sector and went, flexible working, what's that? I'm a prison probation officer, I'm a teacher. But apparently it is more common. It is more common in jobs with higher work autonomy. So the more independently you work, the more common it is that you can work flexibly. It is rare in management and executive positions. It is also rare to see jobs advertised as flexible. People tend to take a full-time, normal job, as it were, and then request flexibility over time. I think there is enough evidence by now that flexible working arrangements bring a whole host of benefits, both to the organisation and the individual. There are some negative effects that it might be worthwhile bearing in mind because they can be mitigated and avoided. The negatives for an organisation are actually mostly perception-based, but there is a fear of reduced productivity. Managers often worrying about the difficulties of managing flexible workers. This is such a sentence. Why did I write this? There are operational pressures and a lack of operational capacity to manage fluctuations in workforce numbers. Why am I doing this to myself? But there are some real practical impacts of flexible working arrangements, and the most important of these is if the arrangements are not covered by formal policy and consistent across the organisation, there can be a perception of unfairness. And this can lead to disrupted work relations. Why does that person get to work flexibly and I don't? It can be difficult to manage cohesive team performance. I mean, particularly if the team members are performing interdependent tasks. But I would also say that an organisation like ours, that is global, and we have people literally everywhere who do perform interdependent tasks, we make it work. But it often necessitates a change in work practices and communication practices to make these things run a little bit more smoothly. On an individual level, there is the effect that it may have on your career prospects. As working flexibly is rare in senior management positions, it can be seen that you can't work in an executive role and be a flexible worker. You can be overlooked for promotion. Flexible workers are quite often seen as lacking in ambition, which I don't think is true. There is a certain danger of work intensification, particularly if you're working from home and your work starts interfering with your home life or your family life. Or the flexible worker might feel obliged to work harder and longer hours to prove that they are worth the flexible working arrangements. It can be a bit difficult to switch off. I also think that if you opt to work part-time, it's really important that the workload reflects this, so that, for example, if you go down to working 4 days a week, you don't still do the same amount of work you did before, you just pay 20% less salary. Studies are getting quite a lot of mixed results when it comes to the positive and negative impact on a personal, individual level. What is found is that the amount of autonomy and control over your own work is the main deciding factor whether working flexibly improves your work-life balance or not. So the more you can control your workload, the more positive impact it has. So the positives. Isn't this a glorious photograph, by the way? I love it, she looks so happy. So for an individual, working flexibly can absolutely improve your work-life balance. As I said, the studies are getting slightly mixed results. It can be a really good cost reduction tool because you can reduce your commuter cost. If you're working flexi time, you have more control over avoiding rush hour, which, trust me, is nice, because when you're stuck on a train for an hour, you want a seat. It provides opportunities to manage your own workload so that you can work at your own peak hours of productivity, and you can decide what tasks you perform when and from where. As for the organisation, employers who have introduced a range of flexible working arrangements tend to think that it brings a positive impact on the organisation. And the more options they have available, the more likely they are to give a really positive assessment. Performance tends to be higher. Employees who feel able to manage their work-life balance perform better. We see a higher degree of motivation, we see a higher degree of commitment, and much lower turnover. And in organisations where the work is often manual, you see fewer work accidents. Flexible workers, they tend to craft their environment to improve their own efficiency, and they then share these ideas with their colleagues, and the whole team benefits. Flexible workers also tend to engage in much more colleague support. They demonstrate greater commitment and more willingness to give back. When the possibility of working flexibly is there, you open up the door to a wider range of candidates, different backgrounds, different family life commitments or health conditions, and in return you get a much greater mix of skills and experience and knowledge. Also, if I can go back to the gender equality issue, it has been proven that having more women in senior management roles make an organisation more productive and successful. And I think we can quite easily chalk up the discrepancies between men and women in the C-suite to the difficulties of managing childcare and career. Slightly less obvious benefits for an organisation: you can reduce your carbon footprint and your overhead costs. The average carbon footprint of an office-based worker is 1.5 tons of CO2 per year, whereas for a home-based worker is almost half of that. And by using staggered home working and hot desking, an organisation can reduce their office space or allow growth without having to move. So, finishing off with some suggestions for best practice. The organisation needs to ensure clear communication, and they need to set boundaries and manage expectations. Having formal policy, making formalised arrangements. It's also really important to ensure that both parties are willing to maintain a level of flexibility with their flexibility. So, this is my normal working from home day, I'm here, that kind of thing. Sometimes changing the hours to allow for meetings, all of that stuff, really important. It's very important to implement consistent practices across the teams so that there is this perception of fairness across the group. Consider each request on its own merits using consistent principles. Provide management training and support so that they in turn can manage and support their staff. Encourage managers and executive managers to work flexibly so that they act as role models. I think it's really important to review working and communication practices so that you can maintain teamwork regardless of where the team is based. Implement personal work arrangements during the recruitment process. Start advertising jobs with the availability of flexible working arrangements, and you're going to open up to a whole different pool of candidates. And I think the most important, do not overlook your flexible workers when it comes to career progression. Thank you very much. I feel like I all of this tomorrow. Does anybody have any questions, any thoughts, any experiences they want to share?
How did you go about actually getting your flexible working arrangements done?
I asked for it. I sat my manager down and requested it. As simple as that.
What did you say?
Well, when I came back after having had Elin, so I know that most of you know me, but I have a 6-year-old who's disabled, and she's my first baby. So when I came back after having her, I actually went back doing a 4-day week. And I am one of these people who felt that I was doing 5 days of work for less salary, so I ended up just going full time. But when I had that chat with my line manager at the time of saying, right, I'm just going to go back to work full time, but can I have a couple of days working from home? And that was absolutely no problem. And then I went off and had my second baby, and then I came back and I requested, in addition to the 2 days of working from home, to shift my work hours. Because I'm up at stupid o'clock in the morning, and I may as well come into work. And then work at my peak hours of productivity, which are 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. And then after 2 p.m, things sort of start slowing down in my brain, and around 4 I leave and I go home and I have dinner with my family. It works much better for me, and I think the company gets an awful lot more out of me doing it that way. So it's literally just a question of sitting down with my boss and saying, this is what I would like. I think it's very easy doing it when you can play the disability card. And you shouldn't have to play the disability card. Anybody in this room should be able to go to their line manager and say, I would like this form of working arrangement. And I mean, there are so many different combinations of flexible working arrangements that you can put together as well, I think. So I think it would be very hard. I think it's very hard not to get at least something, if you're reasonable about how you request it. Yep.
I thought you mentioned having the work-life balance and making sure that your work doesn't sort of seep into the rest of your life. Do you have any sort of tips on how to manage that?
Adequate childcare, I think, is very important. But that's actually more to make sure that family life doesn't interfere on work life. I switch my computer off. I leave it. I walk. I go. But I didn't, actually. When I started working from home, I too had this feeling of, I need to work so much longer. As I need to work my commuting hours as well as my work hours, just to prove that I am doing it and I can do it. And then I realized how stupid I was. So it's a question of manage your time. It is, I mean, actually, you can be so much more productive when you're working from home because nobody disturbs you. So you can close the door around you, you can really focus on your work, you have your set kind of, this is what I need to do today, and then you look at the clock and you go, oh, only half the day's gone by. What do I do now? You are more effective at home. Or you can be, if you work instead of clean, or, you know, those kinds of things. Or your 2-year-old doesn't open the door and go, hi mama, which also tends to happen a lot, hence the childcare issue. But yeah, it's just a question of actually saying to yourself that these are my boundaries, and stick to those. I also quite like grabbing my laptop and going off and working in a coffee shop somewhere, just to once again really get that focus.
Have you felt like, because you're sometimes not here, same as all the other people, like missing out on conversations? And
not so much, actually. We are, in our team, we're pretty good at keeping sort of low-level communication going in Skype, because in emerging market research, we are global and we work really closely together. So we actually have a quite good electronic communication network. I think it could be better, and I think our team really needs to embrace Teams rather than Skype. When there are important meetings, I will change my hours so that I can take part in them. And I did that on Monday, because it was really important to me to be in a meeting that was taking place after I've usually gone home. So, not necessarily for me, but I know that other people can feel that. The one thing I do feel I miss out on is going out for drinks with the team, because they go at 5. And I've already left. Whereas if I was working until 6, then I could go with them for an hour. So yeah, maybe I think we need to change our pub practices and start going during lunchtime instead.
Tom, would you say, you touched on sort of career progression potentially being an issue, a downside. Would you say from your own experience you've had a negative impact from going to flexible work?
Well, I'm quite a pushy person, so when I wanted to make changes to my job role, I push those through. But yeah, I guess in a way, because I have an idea of where I would like my career to go at the moment, and it's not moving in that direction quite as quickly as I would like to.
Mm. And do you think that's partly because of?
I think it is partly because I work flexibly. I don't think it is the sole reason. Actually, I know for a fact that it's not even the main reason. The main reason is the sale, and you know, I just kind of have to sit back and bide my time a little bit before I start pushing for things again, which is very understandable.
So not had a great impact then, really?
I don't think so, necessarily, but then I'm not aiming to be a team manager or an executive manager. Well, my personal aim is to effectively change what it is I do in order to develop my skills.
And if I may, you said you sort of pushed for what might be seen as a better role or whatever it might be. Did you then feel a greater pressure to work less flexibly because there was more responsibility perhaps, or more?
No, it actually opened up for me to work more flexibly.
Okay.
Because I gained so much more autonomy over what it is I do. So it really opened up for me to work more flexibly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.